Hello and welcome back to today's third and final installment of All Things Money. Appreciate you sticking with through the show today. I hope it's been good. It's been a lot of fun doing. If you missed the first couple segments, we talked in the first segment about a couple of tax tips. We started last segment on the Congressional Budget Office and how they do their 10-year budget projections and all their other analysis they do for members of Congress, the House, Senate, as well as the White House. And if you missed it, we'll try to recapture some of that right now, but head on over to our website, dlblain.com. We'll put up archive copies of the show and you can kind of catch up. But the point is that the Congressional Budget Office, which so many people rely on and so many point to as the objective source, between the different parties, their projections are just flat ridiculous. And they assume that there are no business cycles and that they make some really outlandish assumptions. Now, granted, it's very difficult to plan for the future. Nobody knows what the future holds, but there are some ways that you can handle it. And I went on the website of the CBO and you look at the people that are there and, the Harvard PhDs and economic counsel this, economic counsel that, and you look at that and you think, who is approving these budgets? I mean, who is it, all these people with these great fancy degrees and things like that, and who is it that approves a 10-year budget projection that doesn't even factor in another recession, doesn't even factor in a natural disaster, doesn't factor in a North Korea, an Afghanistan, or anything like that. When we look at the history of the United States, you look at the history of the world, these things are constantly recurring. They don't even take into account the fact that, the United States in the 1800s was an emerging economy. I mean, we were China. We were an emerging economy. And we experienced this rapid acceleration in growth throughout the Industrial Revolution, World War I, and then on into World War II. And of course, the post-World War II period, very unique in U.S. history. Our manufacturing base was essentially the world's manufacturing base. I mean, Europe and Japan, had been destroyed. And so everybody was looking to us for this manufacturing base. And so you look at the history of this great country and our rapid growth, and to think that structurally nothing has changed, and you can just fall back on those assumptions of this normal, 2 to 3% annual growth per year, I think is ridiculous to base budget projections, debt projections, things like that. And so my purpose of today's show is just to get you to think, go out there, do your research, whether you're Democrat, Republican, you like Obama, you don't like Obama. They're all, in my opinion, basing their planning on ridiculous assumptions. And that if you look at planning, which is what we do every day, you've got to factor in these unusual, and that they should adopt a probabilistic approach rather than, hey, this is our 10-year budget assumptions. Anybody that does what I do and has to make money from it or make sure that people don't run out of money, you would never use a point estimate of you're here and you're going to be here. No, you do a probability estimate of, well, there's a 80% chance of you ending up between here and here. It's a much more robust. In fact, if you listen to Warren Buffett at all, everything that he does, his brain, I wish I had his brain just sort of works in probabilities. And that's what type of projection that we should use, is that, well, there's a 80% probability that our debt will be between this range and this range. It's a much more robust way of doing things, but of course it's much more difficult. You can't fit it in a 2-second sound bite, and you can't bash the other party over the head with it either. But anyway, so this 10-year projections from the CBO out to 2023 suggests that we're going to have above trend growth peaking in 2014 and then dropping back to trend growth out for the next 10 years. They've been projecting that ever since this recession started. There are other people out there such as Jeremy Grantham, Reinhardt, Robert Gordon, other people in the investment economic industry that are arguing that long-term trend growth is probably not going to be anywhere near what it's been. You've got issues with productivity. Productivity, you have two main inputs into GDP growth. You can either have more people working, increased labor participation. We saw that. Women entering the workforce was a huge boost to productivity. And then you have the other component, which is technological innovation. And so those two things go together to produce GDP growth. Well, we're just not seeing, the productivity growth. I mean, yeah, the latest Samsung Galaxy phone or whatever was just announced, or the iPod or things like that. Yeah, they're nifty little gadgets, but major productivity growth, such as the invention of the internal combustion engine or the invention of the microchip and things like that really launched productivity forward. We're just not seeing that. Maybe even things in healthcare. Yeah, we can rebuild parts of the human body and sequencing the human DNA and curing disease and things like that. But I'm not saying don't do that, but what we're looking at is in terms of GDP growth, and these things are not massive injections into GDP growth. They don't make efficiency. I mean, the efficiency curve is really flattened out. And so there's an argument, especially in the United States, when you have the majority of our economy based on a service economy. And so some of these other people are arguing that, hey, maybe long-term growth in the United States is not 2 to 3%. Maybe it's more like 1%. And the CBO doesn't even really take this into account, that, put a probabilistic estimate on it, that, a 20% chance of 0.5% growth, a 50% chance of 1% growth, and a 10% chance of 4% growth. That's what a probabilistic framework is. And so at the end, you come out with a range of assumptions. And so the CBO just seems to be ignoring ample research that their estimates are maybe overly optimistic. Even if you look at some of the other organizations, Social Security and some of the other organizations that have to produce long-term estimates, they're not even on the same sheet of music. Okay, well, we're coming up to the end of the show there. It's some good information. What I'm trying to do is get you to be skeptical, and maybe you already are skeptical, but go out there and try to find out the facts when you hear the CBO or Democrats or Republicans saying, talking about budget projections, because there's just a lot more to that story than is normally told. Well, that's all the time we have. I hope you'll join us again next week.
The proceeding was a paid program. The opinions expressed are not necessarily those of WNBU and Inner Banks Media.